Imagine you're looking at the architectural blueprints for a brand new, flawlessly designed city.
Okay, like a perfectly mapped out utopia.
Right, exactly. Every street, every single building is mathematically precise.
Hmm.
But as you look closer, if you're really paying attention to the details, you notice something that is, well, entirely contradictory.
Like a glitch in the design.
Yeah, a massive glitch, because the city is being built exclusively for robots like synthetic beings that never age, they never sleep, and they absolutely never reproduce.
Right.
Yet, right there on the blueprints, right in the center of town, the plans call for a massive maternity ward and a playground and an elementary school.
Which is, I mean, a massive logistical error. Those two realities literally cannot exist in the same space.
No, they can't.
You either have a population that doesn't reproduce or you have maternity wards. You can't have both.
Exactly. And that bizarre clash of realities is, it's what we are unpacking for you in today's deep dive. So welcome in.
Glad to be here.
If you've ever, tried to make sense of the timeline of the end times, it can feel like this massive, unsolvable puzzle. So today, our mission is to explore a really fascinating theological and logistical paradox that's presented in our source document, which is titled Rapture, Millennium, Chronology.
Yeah, and the author of this document focuses on what they call the Millennium population paradox.
Right.
It centers on the millennium, which is a literal 1,000-year earthly kingdom, and the really intense theological debate over who exactly is going to live there.
Right, who actually populates it.
Exactly. The document argues that understanding the population of this future kingdom is, well, it's the absolute key to understanding the entire prophetic timeline.
And specifically, it uses this paradox to argue for a pre-tribulation rapture. Now, setting some ground rules for you as we jump into this, today's deep dive is a strictly objective exploration of the arguments and the timeline presented in the specific text.
Right, we're not taking sides here.
Exactly. We aren't here to take a theological side or, tell you what to believe. We are simply mapping out the fascinating logic that the author uses to solve this puzzle.
And our core directive today is to look directly at the evidence provided. Because since this is fundamentally a textual puzzle, we're going to keep the scriptures central.
Yeah, we have to look at the raw materials.
Right. We'll be reading the specific references out loud so you can clearly see the paradox for yourself, and then we'll evaluate the source's proposed solution together.
So, if our blueprint has a glitch, we need to look at those raw materials. To solve this puzzle, we first have to understand the conflicting pieces.
The immortals versus the mortals.
Right. We have to start by contrasting two very different descriptions of the afterlife or the end times presented in the Bible. Let's look at the first piece, the nature of resurrected believers. So let's read Matthew chapter 22, verse 30.
Okay, I have it right here. It says, "At the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven."
Yeah, like the angels. And the document pairs that with 1 Corinthians 15, verses 51 through 52. Let me read that one really quick.
Go for it.
It says, "Listen, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed."
So those are foundational texts for the author's argument. They establish that resurrected, glorified saints undergo a complete biological and operational overhaul.
Wait, hold on. Walk me back a second, because glorified is a pretty heavy theological term. What does that actually mean in this context? Like, does it mean they glow? Do they eat? Are they like ghosts?
That is a great question, and it's where a lot of people actually get tripped up.
Yeah, it's confusing.
According to the text analysis of these verses, a glorified body isn't a ghost. It's physical, but it is imperishable. It's immortal. It's completely sinless. And crucially, based on that Matthew verse we just read, they do not marry or reproduce. The human reproductive mandate is just, well, it's finished for them.
Got it. So that is our population of robots from the analogy earlier.
Exactly.
They're beings that are transformed and no longer participate in the cycle of birth and death. But here's where we hit that architectural error. We have these immortal beings, but then we turn up a completely different set of blueprints in the Old Testament prophets. Let's look at Isaiah 65, verses 22-23, which is heavily relied upon in our source.
I'll read this one, and as I do, notice how different the environment is from what we just discussed.
Yeah, pay attention to the details here.
Isaiah 65 says, "Never again will there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his years." It goes on to say, "They will build houses and dwell in them. They will plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They will not labor in vain, nor will they bear children doomed to misfortune. For they will be a people blessed by the Lord, they and their descendants with them.
Okay, so bringing back my sci-fi world-building analogy.
Yeah.
If you have a planet populated entirely by glorified immortals who don't marry or reproduce, but your prophetic blueprints for the society clearly mandate childbirth, physical labor, people building houses, planting vineyards, and even aging. I mean, somebody messed up the math.
Somebody definitely made an error in the design phase.
Yeah. You can't have immortals signing up for a LeMay's class. How do these realities coexist?
And this tension is exactly what the source defines as the core problem. Just think about it. If there is a simultaneous resurrection of all believers at the exact moment of Christ's second coming,
Then every single believer gets an immortal, glorified body all at once.
right, sweeping the board totally clean of regular humans.
Wow. Okay.
And if that happens, it leaves absolutely no natural, mortal humans left to do the things Isaiah 65 describes. I mean, you cannot fulfill the prophecy of childbirth and physical labor if everyone on earth is an immortal who doesn't reproduce.
So the tension between immortals and mortals is the crux of the entire paradox.
Precisely.
So if you're tracking the math with us at home, we have a massive conflict here between the immortal population and the mortal activities described by the prophets. To figure out how the document resolves this, we need to test the different end timelines and see how their construction schedules hold up.
Yeah, let's look at the options.
The text first takes aim at what it calls the post-tribulation view.
Right, and the post-tribulation teaching proposes a very specific sequence. It argues that the rapture, which is the catching up of believers, and the second coming of Christ, occur simultaneously at the very end of a 7-year period of global hardship known as the tribulation.
Okay, let's do the theological math on this view, using the scriptures the source provides. First, let's calculate the believers. We'll look at 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 16 through 17, and Revelation 20, verses 4 through 6.
Okay.
The text argues that in the post-tribulation timeline, at Christ's return, all believers, both dead and alive, are glorified instantly.
That is the sequence they propose, yeah. So on the believer side of the ledger, the moment Christ returns, you have 100% immortal, glorified bodies. Every single person who has faith is transformed. 0 reproductive capability.
Okay, so that's the believers. Now let's calculate the unbeliever side of the ledger in this exact same timeline. The source directs us to Matthew 13, verses 40 through 43, and Revelation 20, verses 11 through 15. Let me just read a portion of that Matthew passage.
Yeah, go ahead.
As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil.
Right. And the document uses those passages to establish that at the second coming, all unbelievers are judged and completely removed from the earth. They do not enter the millennial kingdom at all.
Hold on. If I'm doing the math here,
Let's hear it.
if 100% of the believers are transformed into immortals, and 100% of the unbelievers are swept off the board and removed completely, I mean, 100 minus 100 is 0.
It is indeed.
That equals 0 mortals left on planet Earth. Who is planting the vineyards? Doesn't that completely break the prophecy in Isaiah?
It absolutely shatters it. And the source argues this is the fatal flaw of the post-tribulation view.
Wow.
A purely post-tribulational timeline cannot mathematically or logically account for the population of the kingdom. If the rapture and the second coming happen at the exact same time, you have an empty planet when it comes to natural humans.
Right.
The prophecy of Isaiah 65 becomes literally impossible to fulfill.
Okay, so since that timeline leaves us with an empty planet and basically breaks the blueprints, we have to look at the alternative. This forces us to move to the timeline our source argues actually does work, logically and chronologically.
The pre-tribulation rapture.
Yes, the pre-tribulation rapture solution. Let's look at the scriptures and see how the author claims to solve this population paradox.
So the foundation of this solution is all about timing. The pre-tribulation view argues that the church is removed before the 7-year tribulation even begins.
I'll read Revelation 3.10, which the source anchors his point on. It promises to keep believers from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth.
Right.
Paired with that 1 Thessalonians verse from earlier, the source argues this establishes the church's early removal. So, stage 1, the church is gone, glorified and off the earth entirely.
Which means the 7-year tribulation period begins with an earth populated entirely by unbelievers. There are 0 believers on the planet at day 1 of the tribulation.
I'm picturing this whole process like a multi-stage water filtration system.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
The pre-tribulation rapture is the first filter. It catches all the believers and pulls them out early. The tribulation starts with 0 believers. But according to the source, the demographics don't stay that way, right?
Not at all. And we shouldn't gloss over what the tribulation actually is. The source describes it as the most horrific period in human history, like apocalyptic judgments, war, famine. But amidst that, a massive demographic shift occurs. Let's look at Revelation 7, verses 9 through 14.
Okay, I'll read the key part of that. After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language. And he said, these are they who have come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb.
So the author points to this great multitude, along with a specific group of 144,000 Jewish individuals mentioned earlier in that chapter, to prove that during the tribulation, a massive new believing population is produced.
Millions of people come to faith after the initial rapture.
Exactly.
But surviving that second filter, like the 7 years of the tribulation, is incredibly dangerous.
Oh, it's lethal. The source notes from Revelation 6 that many, perhaps most of these new tribulation believers are martyred for their faith.
Wow.
But, and this is the critical piece for solving our puzzle, some of them survive. They survive all 7 years of apocalyptic conditions, and they do it in their natural flesh and blood, mortal bodies.
Okay, so let's pause and look at the board at the end of the 7 years. We have mortal believers who managed to survive, and we must still have a ton of mortal unbelievers left over who rejected faith but managed to stay alive. So Christ returns to earth. Do all these survivors just walk into the millennium together?
No, and this is where the final mesh in your filtration metaphor comes in. This is the final earthly judgment.
Okay.
The source highlights 2 specific events that occur right at the second coming. First, the judgment of Israel, found in Ezekiel 20, verses 34 through 38.
Let me grab that one. Ezekiel 20 says, I will bring you from the nations and gather you from the countries where you have been scattered. I will purge you of those who revolt and rebel against me.
So God purges rebellious Israelites, leaving only a believing mortal remnant. Then we have the judgment of the nations described in Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46.
Ah, right, the famous separation of the sheep and the goats. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats.
Exactly. The unbelieving Gentiles, the goats, are removed entirely, sent to judgment. The only ones left standing on the earth are the sheep, the mortal Gentiles who showed faithfulness.
So let me make sure I'm getting this sequence right, because if I am, this completely solves the math problem.
Let's hear it.
The church is raptured early, leaving an earth of unbelievers. During the 7 years, a new group of believers emerges through incredible hardship. Then, at the very end, Christ runs a final filter, the judgments of Ezekiel and Matthew, removing all the remaining unbelievers.
And what are you left with?
You're left with a highly specific demographic. To use the text's summary, the tribulation begins with 0 believers on earth. The millennium begins with 0 unbelievers.
Yes. What is left standing on the earth is what the document calls a mortal seed population.
A mortal seed population.
Right. Surviving Jewish and Gentile believers who still have their natural, physical, mortal bodies, they haven't been glorified yet. They are the ones who walk right into the millennial kingdom. They are the ones who will fulfill Psalm 127, verse 3, having children and building families. They are the ones fulfilling the prophecy of Isaiah 65, building houses and planting vineyards. The pre-tribulation timeline provides the mortals. The math finally works.
It is an elegant solution to the math problem, I'll give it that. But honestly, it creates an entirely new sociological puzzle.
Oh, for sure.
Think about the society we've just built. We now have both groups on Earth at the exact same time during this 1,000-year kingdom. We have the glorified, immortal believers who returned from heaven with Christ, and we have this mortal seed population having kids, farming, and living natural lives. How on earth does a society function when it's populated by both flawless immortals and flawed mortals?
It's a fascinating dynamic. The source describes this as a 2-tiered society. Let's look at the first tier, the glorified rulers and administrators. If we open up to Daniel 7, verse 27.
I've got it right here. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people, the Most High. And then Revelation 20, verse 4 says they came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years.
Right, so these passages establish that the glorified saints, The raptured church, the Old Testament saints, and the resurrected tribulation martyrs, they are given actual authority to govern. They are immortal, they are sinless, and they administer justice. They essentially provide the governmental framework for the kingdom.
Okay, so that's tier 1. Tier 2 is the mortal subjects, the believing Jewish remnant and the Gentile sheep who survive the filter. They're the ones living naturally, marrying and forming the massive population base over those 1,000 years. But here's is where I get tripped up, and I have a really pointed question based on the text.
Go ahead.
If the only mortals allowed into the millennium are the ones who pass that intense final judgment filter, meaning they're all proven faithful believers who survived the tribulation, why does Christ need a heavy hand to rule them?
Ah, I see where you're going.
Yeah, the source cites Psalm 2, verse 9 and Revelation 19, verse 15, which explicitly state that Christ will rule the nations with a rod of iron.
Right.
If they just survived the filter, aren't they the ultimate good guys? Why the iron fist? Shouldn't it be a utopia where everyone just gets along?
It's a completely logical question, and the answer lies in understanding human nature, specifically what theology calls the sin nature. The expert consensus in this document is that even though these mortal survivors are believers, their DNA hasn't been rewritten yet.
Wait, what do you mean by that?
Well, just because they survived the tribulation and have faith doesn't mean their physical bodies or their minds have been perfected. They haven't received glorified bodies. They're still entirely human,
Right?
which means they still get angry, they still get selfish, they still experience greed.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought about that.
And you have to compound that over time. These survivors will marry, and they will have children, and those children will be born with that exact same human nature. So generation after generation, for 1,000 years, you have a booming population of natural, flawed human beings.
So that perfectly explains that for the first tier, the immortal, sinless rulers aren't just there for show. They are an absolute administrative necessity.
Exactly.
They have to administer flawless, immediate justice and maintain order over a mortal population that's still entirely capable of doing wrong, of committing crimes, of rebelling. They need a rod of iron because human nature hasn't been eradicated yet.
Precisely. The immortals provide the perfect governmental framework that the mortals need to survive and thrive without destroying themselves the way human societies historically have.
Which leads us directly to the final and honestly most baffling event in this entire prophetic timeline. We've got this booming mortal population with a human nature governed by immortals for 1,000 years. Let's look at how this all ends.
Right. The climax of this millennium is found in Revelation 20, verses 7 through 9. This passage describes a massive final rebellion against God's city at the very end of the 1,000 years, led by an entity called Gog and Magog.
I want to read a piece of this to really grasp the scale because it's wild. Revelation 20 says, "When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, and to gather them for battle. In number they are like the sand on the seashore. They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people."
Think about the logistical implications of those verses based on everything we've just discussed about the two-tiered society.
It's incredible when you piece it together. Because without the mortal population having kids for 1,000 years, this final battle literally has no army.
Right.
The immortals are sinless, they cannot be deceived or rebelled. The original mortal survivors who entered the millennium were faithful, vetted believers. So by simple deduction, the rebels must be the descendants of the mortals.
That is the ultimate proof of the source's thesis right there. This final rebellion demonstrates the absolute ongoing reality of the human condition.
Yeah.
Think about the environment these descendants grew up in. They lived in a perfect environment. They had a perfect, immortal, uncorrupt government. Christ was literally reigning on earth. There was no systemic poverty, no war for a millennium. Yet, when given the choice, a number, like the sand on the seashore, still chooses rebellion.
So the pre-tribulation view isn't just a theological escape hatch for believers to avoid the wrath of the tribulation. The author's arguing that it is a structural, logistical necessity for the entire end times narrative.
The mortals must exist. They have to populate the earth so that this final demonstration of human free will can occur. It proves once and for all that a perfect environment doesn't fix the human heart, only divine transformation does.
Wow.
Without the pre-tribulation rapture setting up the mortal seed population, the timeline collapses, and that final prophecy has absolutely no participants.
It is incredible how perfectly machined these puzzle pieces are when you look at them through the lens of this document. The rapture, the tribulation, the filtering judgments of the sheep and goats, and the two-tiered millennial kingdom, they all fit together to honor this massive logistical plan. It ensures there are mortals to fulfill the prophecies of Isaiah and immortals to govern them.
It really is a remarkably coherent, scripture-based framework. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Okay.
It builds on this concept of a two-tiered society, but pushes it into a slightly different philosophical direction.
I'm ready for it.
Imagine you are a teenager born in, say, year 500 of the millennium. You're immortal. You grew up in a world with a perfect, immortal government. You have a literal, physical king ruling from Jerusalem. The spiritual realm isn't something you have to take on blind faith. It is a visible, undeniable reality of your daily life.
Right, you'd be interacting with immortal saints on your walk to school. The evidence is literally everywhere.
Exactly. Yet, despite all of that overwhelming physical, undeniable proof walking around your neighborhood, you still possess free will. You still have that internal human nature. What would it be like to have to choose faith, to choose submission to God, in an environment where the divine is no longer unseen, but is the actual ruling authority making the laws and enforcing the peace?
That's intense.
The final rebellion proves that seeing isn't always believing. Even when the utopia is real, the human heart still has to make a choice to surrender.
That is a haunting and fascinating thought to end on. Because no matter how perfect the architectural blueprints of the city are, the real variable is always the human heart living inside it. Thank you for taking this deep dive into the theological paradoxes of the millennium with us. We invite you to keep questioning, keep reading the scriptural references we covered today, and keep exploring. Until next time.